If you're a Washington Commanders fan, you are going to love so much of this episode because you're about to get some insight on Jayden Daniels that will feed your soul. Plus, we're going to give you some guys around the league that we think are poised to have a bounce back year in 2024. We're doing all of that with our favorite guest. Sure, we'll go with that. It's time for some Zero Blitz. He's Frank Schwab. I'm Jason Fitz. You guys know that. It's Frank and Fitz on Zero Blitz. It sounds fun. It's awesome. But you also know that we like to have the rotation. And Jori Epstein comes in, joins us this week. As always, Jori, there's a standard here, right? Like, you have given us very high marks. We make you grade us at the end of shows. We now make C-Rob do the same thing. He's a little grumpier, predictably, when he does that. So I just want to make sure that you're in a good fit. Like, you're feeling good. Today feel like a perfect 10.
I will say Fitz and Blitz, that rhyme situation, like, that helped a little bit. I like that. You turned up the corners of my mind. Frank and Fitz with Zero Blitz. It's like, we're not at 10 yet, but I would say, like, add half a point from whatever I was going to. But I don't know. I feel like if I were to give you guys a 10, like, we would feel content. We wouldn't feel like there's room for improvement. There'd be no growth for the show, especially, like, an off-season show should not get 10 because there's not, like, the best content. So let's just temper our expectations.
I don't know, Frank, you're a perfect 10 to me, my friend. I don't know what's happening here. Like, we're already starting with tempered I'm a pleaser. So, like, you know, I as a pleaser that grew up, especially in the music world, like, where you're just going to play and then you hope people like it. Like, it's a very subjective thing. I kind of need the 10. Like, let's just be honest, Frank. So, you know, you're a 10 to me no matter what Jori says. I just want to start here with positivity.
Need that standing ovation to get you out for the encore. I don't know. I'm trying. I have very little music.
Can I just tell you, like,
here. Sure. What do you got?
You say standing ovation. I'll never forget one of the tours I was on in a band that never made it. We were opening for Kenny Rogers. And at the end of his set, he would stand there and he looked out at the whole crowd. And Kenny would say, you know what? This is the point where I walk off stage and I stand over there. And you guys stand up while you applaud. And I pretend I'm not coming back. And you guys act like you don't think I'm coming back. And then I walk back out on stage. And he's like, you know what? I'm too old for all that. I'm just going to stand here and this is your encore. I respect it. I wish more acts would just do like, hey, guys, this is the encore, and then walk out at the end of the show.
By the way, Jori, have you ever opened for Kenny Rogers?
A couple times, but it's been a while. How about you?
Yeah.
I'll teach you guys a trick. Teach you guys a trick you can use in the show today. See, if you're watching this, Kenny's band, he told the same jokes every night. So Kenny's band standing in the back heard the same jokes every night. So while they were playing, they would just shrug their shoulders and smile. Which from the crowd made it look like they were laughing hysterically. So if you don't like the jokes,
that's pretty good. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. So Schwab. I don't know why I just called you that.
Why not? That's fine.
Frank, we have to pick a time when Fitz says something during the show to simultaneously shrug our shoulders and smile.
That's what we got to do. It's golden. It's golden for people.
Zero is definitely someone who shakes when he laughs.
Is he?
Well,
okay. Yeah. Well,
I wouldn't know.
He does it often. He does. Yeah. I don't know.
I've only been working with him for a year. I haven't seen that laugh.
I'll take your word for it, Jori.
See, I was just catching strays for no good reason. So before we get into that, Jori, everybody's been just absolutely infatuated with Jayden Daniels. We all know going into the draft that every fan base seemed to covet him. I coveted him. I'm the first to admit that. Now he's a Washington Commander. You've got an article out right now. What are the returns, the early returns so far that you found in your research with the Commanders and Jayden?
Yeah, I visited the Commanders facility a couple weeks ago, and it was really interesting both to watch how Jayden operated within that facility and also how his teammates were talking, how his coaches were talking. I think just being on the ground, you get a different sense of that. And one of the stories Dan Quinn told me when we were sitting down in his office is the Commanders, when they were looking to draft Jayden Daniels, were trying to understand, like, what were some of the elements that contributed to him having a pretty significant rise from 2022 to 2023. Like, he did some good things in 2022, and then in his Heisman year, he did a lot of good things way more consistently. And one of the things that Jayden and the LSU staff really attribute that to is his routine. And he would initially in the offseason, he was coming in like 8, 9, 10 p.m. for throwing sessions with Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, some of those guys. And so he tried to get in the facility one day and he couldn't get in. And he was like, no, I need to be able to practice whenever I want. And they changed his fingerprint access at LSU. Then fast forward to the season and Kobe Bryant had all of his famous like you can sleep when we're done. Like, we don't need to rest, all of that. And so he was like, I'm going to get in the facility at 5 a.m. And so he started doing daily film sessions during the season at LSU at 5 a.m. Sometimes his receivers joined. Sometimes he went solo, mix of regular film. He was doing virtual reality, all these things. But he's like, I'm going to be working when everybody else is sleeping because that's what's going to make me great. I can't just come back and do the same thing again. And so Dan Quinn, Adam Peters love that. They love this idea of like, hey, we'll see when he starts. I think we can all guess how soon that will be, and it's pretty soon. But before we even get there, I think what they'll be able to say is he might not be there yet. He might not have arrived from a skill set standpoint. It's going to take time to acclimate within the NFL. But look at what he has done from a work ethic standpoint. Look at what we'll be able to point to as an example for the team, because the quarterback is going to be an example to the team whether they like it or not. And so Dan Quinn was telling me the story of his assistants giving out the black plastic fob keys to all of the players. And he's like, hey, can you leave one back for me? And he and Adam like walk up to Jayden and they're like, we have something for you. And Dan just hands it to him and goes, 24 hours. And he wanted him to know, like, we want you to bring that work ethic that you had at LSU to the Commanders. And so now Jayden's been waking up at 5 in the facility between 5:30 and 5:45. He'll do a walkthrough on his own. Luke McCaffrey's been joining him. Then he'll go lift if he needs to. He'll eat breakfast, get some film study, and shower. And I'm like, I am not usually up at 7 in the morning. I'm more of a night person. He is like crossing 4 things off his to-do list by 7 in the morning. But I think that it really shows because it allows him to be so confident in his preparation in this playbook that is very new to him. It's new to everyone. It's Cliff Kingsbury's offense in Washington that he doesn't want to be, in his words, like year 4 or 5 of Arizona. He wants us to be year 1 of Washington offense. And so guys were telling me like, hey, I took 2 steps on a 3-step out, and Jayden saw it and was like, hey, you need to take that 3rd step. Or I wasn't where he wanted me to be on the crosser, and he kept me after, and he was like, okay, here's when I want you to turn your eyes. Here's when I'll be anticipating this. And I think there are very specific examples of improvement tactics that he is giving his teammates, and conversations that some quarterbacks never will initiate in their career. And a lot of quarterbacks would not initiate as a rookie before they've been named the starter. And Jayden's doing that. And so I think when you look at the Commanders, you can say there might be some talent questions on that team. There's a long way to go in their rebuild, but do they have the right guy in? And so far, he has been doing what they want to see from him.
I mean, I hate to admit this to you, Fitz, but I went behind your back and talked to Charles McDonald on the exempt list. And
I noticed.
Yeah, I know. And Yahoo Sports for the social feed ended up cutting a clip that I kind of said that I think the Commanders could be a playoff team possibly, and their ceiling of outcomes. And I our boss Ryan Spoon put the eyes emoji on a tweet, replied to that, and now I'm like so dug into the Washington Commanders being good this year and being the breakout team. And so I love hearing that and reading what Jori had to say about Jayden Daniels, because obviously if I'm high on the Commanders, I got to be really high on Jayden Daniels being a star right away, and I think he can be. There's nothing about his game that I don't like other than him taking big hits. Like, I worry about that. I worry about him getting hurt.
Dan did tell me 2 things. 1, we're going to work on sliding with him. And 2, when we have designed runs, which design runs will exist, but they're going to take advantage of space and leverage and kind of be on the outside. He's not running up the middle, getting hit by linebackers.
And that's great to hear too. But when you hear something like Jayden Daniels is already coaching his teammates, and it's only June, and we haven't even gotten a training camp yet. Love hearing stuff like that. It gets me even more excited to watch this Commanders team. Maybe I'll be dead wrong and I'll be 3-10 by Thanksgiving, but I like a lot of what they've done, and it really starts with Jayden Daniels, who, look, I had a guy, a radio host in Louisiana when I was on, and obviously LSU, a little bit of homerism there, but he said, what does Caleb Williams have that Jayden Daniels doesn't? And it struck me for a second. I said, I can't really answer that. Jayden Daniels both won a Heisman. Both are excellent in the passing game. Jayden Daniels is probably a little more athletic, although Caleb is athletic. Caleb can make a bunch of plays off platform and all that, and he should have gone number 1. But when you really think about it, would it be that surprising if Jayden Daniels is the star of this quarterback class? I don't think it would. He's awesome. He's great. And just hearing that about his work ethic and that story you reported just confirms everything, this guy's going to be really good right away. And maybe, again, I made with C-Mac, it's a really lazy comparison, but in 2012, The Washington Commanders, they weren't the Commanders at the time. Washington wasn't expected to be anything. They're a really bad football team, obviously. They're drafting second overall. They took a dual threat, Heisman Trophy winning quarterback second overall, ended up blowing away all expectations, winning the NFC East. RG3 won the Rookie of the Year. Why can't something similar happen to Washington this year, especially if Daniels is as good as advertised?
I think, look, I hate comparisons of other players sometimes because I want every player to be their own man. That being said, everything Jori just described about the work ethic, the communication with receivers, correcting them on their routes, talking to them like they've been in the league forever, does that not mirror what we just heard 1 year ago with CJ Stroud? And one of the early things everybody said about CJ was, man, there's a different understanding, not just of the offense, but of how to process the information and how to explain it to his receivers. And that was a big part of what they attributed success to. So for me, if you look last year, some of the quarterbacks that we saw have tremendous success. We saw CJ do it. Well, we hear some of the things Jori talks about in the work ethic and communication aspect. We also saw for his limited time on the field, Anthony Richardson have tremendous success because the coaching staff knew how to get the best out of him. I do think it's fair to look at it and say, hey, we've seen teams that we didn't think were going to be good just a year ago suddenly put themselves in the playoff conversation because they made the most out of what they had at the rookie quarterback position. I think Jayden Daniels in Washington are absolutely primed to do that. Now, it's a very difficult division, but if I'm just looking at success at the quarterback position, if you take the tools and then you take this mental aspect and this work ethic, the one thing that you control the controllables, the work you're putting in, why not Jayden? Why not Washington? Especially if you're a Commanders fan, you think you've got a coach that can nail the defensive side of the ball. You think you've got an offensive coordinator that can be smart and hard to predict. And you think you have a quarterback that's wildly athletic. That's if you're a Commanders fan, that's how you're feeling right now.
Yeah, most roster turnover in the NFL this year, which isn't a bad thing. They went out. Adam Peters said this team stinks. I need to rebuild it. Now look, there's questions, as Jori alluded to. The offensive line stinks. There's a lot of questions in the secondary. Do they have a running back? I like Brian Robinson, but nobody's confusing him for Christian McCaffrey. There are some deficiencies there, but I really like this team. I'm not just doing this whole Commanders might be the breakout team just to do something different. I believe in it. I really think this Commanders team, especially if Jayden comes along quick, they could be really a big surprise in the NFL this year.
Yeah, it'll be difficult because you have the NFC East, and again, at least two other teams that should be very competitive, if not three. I don't really have a sense of what Brian Dable and Daniel Jones are going to be able to do this year.
Oh, I do. They're going to be awful.
They're going to be terrible.
Just trash.
Cut that. Like social cut. Let me be clear. The New York Football Giants are going to
suck. How do you guys really feel? Let's have a little more honesty on this podcast. Wow. No, but I do think it's really interesting. And I think that the other thing I would struggle is, okay, let's say Brian Dable and Daniel Jones do it. Well, you're still going against Kayvon Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence and that whole group on the and Brian Burns, oh, by the way, on that side. And then you've got the whole Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence front that you have to face. The Eagles have had a strong line of scrimmage on both sides. I think that's going to be something that will challenge Jayden. But I think, again, one of the things that they kept coming back to in this process is Dan, who has been a head coach or defensive coordinator for, I don't know, a decade or so now, was saying he knows that when he is scheming for a defense, if you have a mobile quarterback, especially when you can pass and run, not just a runner, someone who can do both. They view Jayden as a dual threat player, but a dual threat player who is a passer first. But if you have someone who can do both, you just have this math problem on defense where you constantly need to be aware. He's like, I don't think we'll see as many unique defensive coverages on third downs because Jayden will escape if you turn your eyes and you don't leave someone keeping a spy on the quarterback. And so he was kind of thinking about what is the problem that this poses. That's the problem I want to pose for defenses. Going back to what you guys were saying about what's the difference between Jayden and Caleb, I did talk to a scout who, let's just say their team needed a quarterback in the last couple of years, and they were saying had they drafted first overall this year, their head coach would have taken Jayden first. So there is sentiment on that. I have to be careful about how I say this, but yes, there are people who would have taken Jayden first, and I don't think that he and Caleb are just apples to apples. I think that what's interesting is that their resumes are different, not just in terms of their skill sets, but also in terms of the trajectory of their success. Like, you have to say, okay, Caleb 2 years ago, way better than Jayden. Jayden last year, significantly better than Caleb. There's a reason they each got the Heisman. And then you're trying to figure out, if you're a scout, if you're a head coach, if you're a general manager, to what degree is what we're seeing here the ceiling, the floor, and how often are we going to be at what place for each? I mean, Joe Burrow's a great example of someone who had this like crazy year his last year, and then it was able to continue over to the NFL. We've also seen guys who have a crazy year the last year, and then they just can't carry it over and they get to the next level. And so it'll be really interesting to see for both Jayden and Caleb what that looks like. Now, I will say, I think it's extremely possible, and I know I'm not the first one to make this take, that Jayden has a better NFL career, but Caleb has a significantly better rookie year, just because when you look at the cast around him, the Bears went through the rebuild before they got to Caleb. Like, Justin Fields had to deal with those growing pains. Jayden has to deal with the Washington growing pains.
I think that you make a good point with Caleb's expected to have the better rookie season. That's why he's the clear favorite over at BetMGM to win Rookie of the Year. But I just think that Jayden might have a different rookie year. We talked about different, like things look a little different with him and Caleb. Just their style of play. Jayden brings the athleticism right away. Even passing in the NFL is hard. Being a quarterback in the NFL is hard from the pocket. But what doesn't escape is the athleticism. He is going to make big plays with his legs. We saw it over and over and over again at LSU. And you combine that with solid passing. I don't think he's going to be CJ Stroud as a passer right away. He might get there someday, probably not right away, but the athleticism is not going to fail him. You could tell me, hey, he's going to rush for 900,000 yards as a rookie, and that's going to be a crux of their offense. I'd totally believe it because we saw it. We saw it at LSU, and I don't think that takes time to transition. He's got to pick his spots. He's got to slide, all that kind of stuff. But I think he's going to be good right away as a runner. So he might look a little different than Caleb, but I think he could have a more effective rookie season just in a different way.
Well, it's also interesting because on one hand, his best year in college not only was year 5, which means he was very experienced, but it was also the year when he had consistency at offensive coordinator, at play caller in the system after having a lot of different coaches at Arizona State, transferring schools, dealing with COVID. On the other hand, he's coming to Washington, and he has had to learn so many different playbooks. He has had to work with so many different systems. He has had to learn a new roster, a new locker room. And so I do think that versus a guy who might have been in the same place for 4 years, this is not like, oh, what do I do when I change? Like, he figured out last year, what is the system I need and what is the work routine I need to be successful regardless of the external circumstances. And now he's not trying to learn how to be a pro in terms of his work habits this year because he did it last year. He also graduated from Arizona State in 3 years. And so by his 5th year, his 2nd year at LSU, this was a guy who kind of like Joe Burrow a couple of years ago, really was able to just be a football player.
Okay, so from a player that we expect great things from to players that we've expected or seen things from in the past that need to figure out a way to bring back the magic, we thought we'd have a little bit of fun, take a look at some of the players that we think need a bounce back year in 2024. So we picked 3 players each that we're going to take a look at that we think this year really need to find a way to just, wha-bam, come on back. Frank, I'll let you go first, good sir, as the player that you think needs, on the top of your head, first guy off the block that you think needs to bounce back in 2024.
This is easy. This is, drafting Caleb.
This
Williams
is
first
easy.
overall.
Frank is not impressed with your exercise.
No, I'm glad you gave me the first pick because this should just be the Deshaun Watson list, right? Like, we've talked so much about Deshaun, and if he doesn't do it this year, it's just done. Like, you have to, the Cleveland Browns will have to do the Russell Wilson thing and just suck it up and be like, whatever the cap hits are, they are. We just got to move on. This is it for him. You can make excuses for 2022. Can make injury excuses for 2023. I don't think you can make any more excuses for 2024. Either Deshaun Watson does it or he doesn't. I mean, this is it. This is his time. The Browns are set up, I believe, to be Super Bowl contenders. I think they can win a Super Bowl. I think that's how good they are. I do have faith that Deshaun Watson can bounce back. I know you really don't share that, Fitz. I don't know about Jori's opinion on Deshaun Watson as a quarterback. I think he could be good, but I also know if he stinks this year again, that's just done. Like, you whatever ramifications there are from moving on from him, that's what's got to happen because this is his make or break year.
What if he's just okay?
Yeah, I think you keep going with him. That okay quarterbacks get paid like $50 million now, right? Like that's how
this okay quarterback's getting paid a lot more than $50 million.
Yeah.
I think it's challenging because the reason I don't view him in a make or break year is because they're so committed money wise to him. And they can win a lot that it's not like they're going to get this super high pick because they're going to be too good to get a great draft spot and draft a cheap replacement. And if I understand over the cap correctly, it's like $136 million pre-June 1st, over $100 million, even if you do a post-June 1st cut. And so, like, Sean Payton is stubborn enough to do that with Russell Wilson. I don't think the Browns organization is stubborn enough to do that with Deshaun Watson. I think there would need to be something else. I think also there are a lot of guys who probably know, like, hey, we made this bet, and however this ends is going to reflect on our legacies, on our job securities. I mean, look, Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski have both been extended. So, like, they've done so many good things, and in a lot of ways, one in spite of Deshaun Watson. But I'm just curious because I think that there's a lot of reasons, and I know we've talked about this on this podcast, to view him more of like an Odell Beckham Jr., where you have an early amazing career and then you just never get back to that point. But Cleveland believes he's going to get back to that point. I just don't know. Like, when have we seen a quarterback be so mediocre to bad to absent for that many years and then all of a sudden be great? Like, this is not like Geno Smith coming out years into his career because he didn't have that same opportunity that Deshaun Watson had. He didn't have the same layoff Deshaun Watson had. Like, I can't think of a parallel where we've seen this work before.
To your point with the Browns, though, like, when you're in a bad relationship and you just don't want to be, like, alone, sometimes you just figure out, like, hey, you know what, it's fine. It's going to work out. I feel like that's what the Browns know, that they're stuck. They know there's nothing they can do about it. So they're just, putting a beautiful tuxedo on a pig. Like, there is some point here where you just look at it and say, man, I think he's got the yips. I don't think he's going to get through that. I don't think the Browns are ever going to acknowledge that. What I think it's really curious to me is I believe the Browns are a Super Bowl caliber roster. I keep saying that. I think even if Deshaun's only okay, they could win 12 games this year. What do you do if you have an okay quarterback, you win 12 games, and then you take on a great quarterback in the playoffs and you lose? Like, that's more, I think, the life of a Browns fan for the next couple of years is like, you're going to have a team that's good enough to win a bunch of football games, but you do not have a quarterback that I would risk my money on beating Mahomes or Allen or Burrow in a playoff game, right? So, like,
Fitz, you said it. This is my argument for the Browns. They could win 12 games if he's just okay. We've seen Deshaun Watson be a top 6 quarterback in the NFL, 7, whatever you want to call it. What if he's that again? Are they going to win 14? Like, seriously, that's their ceiling. If Deshaun Watson is the guy we saw with the Houston Texans before he quit on them and wanted to get traded and he got all of his shenanigans.
It wasn't that quiet, was it?
It actually was not quiet at all. He pretty loudly quit. What if we get that guy? What if Deshaun Watson does rebound all that way? And 2022 was just a lost season because of suspension. The last season was just the injuries. What if he's that top 5-6 guy again? All of a sudden, the Cleveland Browns are the best team in football. The best team in football. Clearly.
And Fitz, like, when you say, I don't know if Deshaun Watson can beat a Mahomes, a Allen, a Burrow, my question is, does Deshaun Watson need to, or does he need to just not get in the way of his team beating them? Because Myles Garrett can go after those guys, a bunch of guys on that defense. There's so many other people who can contribute. Nick Chubb will be healthy again this year. Like, he doesn't have to do this on his own.
You're both very, very right. I'll believe it when I see it, but I think also, to your point, Frank, you're right that he needs to have a bounce back at 24, in my mind, just because otherwise this chatter gets louder and louder and louder, and I don't think there's a lot of proof of concept that they are going to be able to shut out the noise from that. Jori, we'll give you, as our esteemed guest, the next pick on someone you think needs to bounce back in 2024.
Yeah, I think Justin Fields needs to bounce back, and I think it would be almost unfair to not, like, put this with an asterisk of, like, what he's bouncing back from, because I don't think that Justin Fields individually was bad last year. I think that he was continuing to be the scapegoat of the Chicago Bears overhaul of their rebuild. And now, as we've talked about, Caleb Williams is going to reap those benefits. But their stakes are very high for them this year because he doesn't have that 5th-year option. He doesn't have security after this year. He also probably will have to make whatever kind of statement he's going to make in a very small sample size because Russell Wilson is going to start. And he might be fine. He might be great. And then whether it's Russ getting injured or Justin going in for relief, like when you look at what Sam Darnold did in that little brief period last year against the Ravens, I think that really helped him get his next opportunity. And we'll talk more about him later. And so I think Justin Fields is going to have such a small window to show, hey, here's what I can do and still be at this level versus having to go the veteran journeyman route and hope that he can get back to where he wants to be as a starter.
I think there's 2 kind of troubling things from the past couple months about Justin Fields. First of all, nobody was willing to give up more than a 6th-round pick. Like that says something. There's desperation in the NFL quarterback, and nobody was willing to give up more than that. It's conditional, but whatever. He came at a very, very low price to the Steelers, a shockingly low price. And it kind of tells you what the league thinks of him. And two, the drumbeat from the Steelers beat reporters out there is Fields isn't even close. Like I said, we did a show, I think it was me and you, Fitz, with C-Rob, and I said, I think Justin Fields starts week 1 just because of the situation. You looked at it, and he gives the Steelers a chance for a quarterback of the future that Russell doesn't. But now as I sit here, I don't think, unless something changes in training camp, there's no chance. If a guy is completely being outplayed over the offseason, I don't know that he turns that all around in August and has a chance to start right away. I think he'll start at some point if Russell falters, and he certainly could. But there's really been nothing positive for Justin Fields in the past couple of months that leads me to believe he's going to be some preferred starting quarterback in 2025 and beyond.
You sure you didn't say that on one of those shows with C-Mac where you were just cheating on me? Is that what happened?
He texted me. He slid into my DMs, was like, hey, exempt list. I have no, actually he said, I have no other guests. Could you please bail me out? And I'm like, all right, fine. Sounds good.
I do think it's interesting as a fan of a team, admittedly, that has no idea what they're doing at quarterback this year. It's stunning to me, truly, that the Raiders made the decision to hire Luke Getsy as their offensive coordinator and then weren't willing to give up a 6th-round pick at all in that process for Justin Fields. Like,
but you know that the Luke Getsy-Justin Fields marriage didn't work, so you're not going to try it again.
I think I worked against
But as a team, then you're deciding that Justin Fields was the problem and Luke Getsy wasn't, which is part A. But you're also deciding you'd rather go in with Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew than Justin Fields. Like, that to me, like, you could have gone in a million different directions with your offensive coordinator and then gone out and gotten Justin Fields if you really loved him.
Respectfully to Tom Telesco, the person, your team also decided that the Chargers GM, who hadn't won anything, but lucked into Justin Herbert, was the best option for that job.
You woke up and chose violence today. What is happening here,
Wow.
Jeff?
That was
here
harsh.
I am coming in trying to make sure Jori has a great time. You know what? You get a 1. And you get a 1 as our guest. That's it. That's a 1 on a scale of 1 to 10. You have failed. All right. You know what? I'm just going to change the subject now because I don't have a smart retort to the fact that she's right about it and it hurts my feelings. So players that are going to bounce back in 2024. I'll give you one that this was the first name that popped into my head the minute we decided we were going to do this exercise. And it's Jonathan Taylor. Because last year, the Colts were expected to not be good, right? And we can all admit that. And it turned out that Shane Steichen really had the pulse of this offense, had him clicking when they had Anthony Richardson, and was even willing to and capable of making it work with Gardner. I wouldn't say that Gardner was the reason they were successful, but Shane Steichen certainly was. They had success with another running back, in fact. Jonathan Taylor obviously misses a large portion of the season, but when he came back, he was not the Jonathan Taylor that scared everybody. And this year going into it, I think you've got an Anthony Richardson that I've been really clear on. I think there's still big question marks. He needs to get time on film. He needs to get time on the field. That was his issue coming in. That's still his issue today. But in order for the Colts to be the best they can be, they gave a ton of money to a running back that they believe makes that happen. Jonathan Taylor's got to get his yards per attempt up. He's got to get his yards per game up, and he's still got to be a viable part of the passing game. Like I feel like nobody was sitting there the last month of the season saying, oh God, we've got to take on Jonathan Taylor. And for the amount of conversation and money that went into his deal with the Colts, that's the exact category he's supposed to be in. So for the Colts to reach their potential with Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, Frank, he's got to bounce back.
Yeah, I mean, last year was just a weird season for Jonathan Taylor. He had the injury that he was coming off of. He had the contract situation that strangely turned him into a villain for a while. But we've seen Jonathan Taylor play at that level of, oh my God, we're scared of this guy. We saw it early on in his Colts career. We saw it in his college career on Wisconsin. He is a heck of a back. I think he's going to bounce back, and I think having Anthony Richardson healthy will help him. You have to account for Anthony Richardson in a running game. We didn't see Anthony Richardson for long, but every defensive coordinator knows, we got to worry about this guy in the run game. That opens up lanes for Jonathan Taylor. I think he has a huge season. I believe in his talent. I think he's going to do it. I think he's going to be worth that contract. I'm high on the Colts this year, and a big part of it is Jonathan Taylor. I think he maybe doesn't get all pro again like he did a couple years ago, but I do think he has a really, really good year.
Okay, so Fitz, I'll ask you if you think he had a down year last year. Did you think he had a down year in 2022 as well? Obviously, he wasn't like the rushing title. I'm curious if, without looking, what you think his yards per attempt were in 2022 and 2023.
And they
like
were
how
comparable.
Different?
They were fairly. I think it was 0.1. I didn't look this up, but I think it was like 4.5 versus 4.4 if memory serves me correct. So it was comparable. I
know that's oversimplifying, and I know that you can get one 60-yard run and rip it off, and then all of a sudden it looks different. I think for him to have comparable numbers after everything he was dealing with physically and contract-wise, and do all of that without Anthony Richardson, I think speaks well to the potential of what he could do with Shane Steichen, who I really trust as a play caller, with Anthony Richardson and all the different deception that the two of them can bring in together. I think what this comes down to is not Jonathan Taylor so much as the larger questions of like, can running backs still succeed this late in their career? And do we still believe that running backs with tread on their tires can do anything? And at what point is that about the offensive line versus the running back? And so I think that, to me, that's the question more than like, does he as an individual player have the ability?
The only pushback I'd have to that is 2022, the Colts went into the year presumably with what many thought was going to be one of, if not the best offensive lines in the NFL. And they played like garbage in 2022. And nobody could figure out why. 2023, they were a little bit better. They brought some of that magic back. So part of his poor numbers, and this is what we don't know right now, were his poor numbers in 22 because of the fat guys in front of him or because of the work he was doing. So that's part of the bounce back. Like if the team believed he was only a 4.5 yards per attempt running back, you don't give him that money. Like, there's no way you give him that big deal if he's just 4.4.
I'm not sure why they gave him that money. Most of the league would not have given him that money. It's also interesting just when you think about where the Colts are in the life cycle of their team. I mean, when I was in Miami at the very end of training camp last year, like, there was an expectation he was going to Miami, and I would have understood that a little more. It's hard financially, especially if you're paying Tua eventually, but I think that there's this idea of like, we're so close and he can push us over. The Colts aren't there.
All right, when we come back, we're just getting started on the bounce back players. When we come back, we'll give you a couple more that each of us have our minds on that are about to have a big, at least hopefully big 2024. All right, so we've gotten one player each out, and now we're going to continue the process of bounce back players. I will just cue myself up first because I feel like I'm in love with running backs right now. Like, literally, when you guys said 3 players, it was hard for me not just to make it all running backs, but the next guy on the list is a guy I've talked about with Frank several times. He's a guy that I think has a chance at putting up absolutely epic numbers this year, and it's Derrick Henry. I wouldn't say that Derrick Henry was necessarily down last year, but a lot of people would. I would also say that the Titans' offensive line, as I continue to yell, was not just bad, they were objectively awful. They were terrible. That group of 5 on the football field was an embarrassment for any team. So for Derrick Henry to do anything behind that offensive line was something. Now he goes to an offensive coordinator that has shown us over the course of his 1 year in Baltimore and also in Georgia that he knows how to do a lot of different things. He's shown us that there's plenty of opportunity for this offense to be explosive. Now Derrick Henry's not going to be facing loaded boxes where he has to be the franchise savior. I think the bounce back for Derrick Henry is that he's going to have I know he's old. I know he's got a lot of tread on the tires. I know all that. I don't give a damn. When Lamar does what Lamar's going to do, and I'm presuming Mark Andrews comes back and is healthy for them, they've also found a wide receiver option across the board. I'm just looking at Baltimore saying, man, Derrick Henry's going to have a bounce back year because he's going to be able to feast on wee little men that are trying to take him down. And that doesn't sound like a recipe for success.
Men.
Compared to Derrick Henry, wee little men.
Everybody, yeah, just about everybody is compared
I mean,
to Derrick Henry.
look at like Derrick Henry has like his chest is the size of 4 me's. I'm just saying, Derrick Henry is a beast of a human being.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, on one hand, even though Todd Monken kind of helped Lamar open up as a passer or allowed Lamar to do more as a passer than he was previously empowered to do, I think they are still such a run-heavy team. They were first in attempts. They were first in rushing yards. I think what I worry about with Derrick Henry, again, back to the running back debate, yes, he has been super productive, but he has led the league in attempts and touches 4 of the last 5 years. And so it's like, if you have that much tread on your tires, this is not just someone who's been playing. This is someone who's been playing a long time. There are years when no one has touched the football more than he has in terms of all the skill players. And 4 of those times, no one rushed more than he had, which meant no one got tackled on their rushes more than he had for the most part. And so I just think that takes a toll. Now, I think he is still worth, again, going back to why the Dolphins would have signed Jonathan Taylor. I think he's still worth it for the Ravens and can help them, but I don't think that we should expect him to have like a historic Derrick Henry 15 touchdown year because this is a guy who's been through a lot physically.
I'm rooting for him because of a couple reasons. One, Derrick Henry is my favorite running back in the NFL since Barry Sanders. I just love watching him play. Like, he is such a unicorn. A guy who's 247 pounds, is the fastest guy in the field at times. It's unbelievable. Go back and watch his 99-yard touchdown run. He's just a great player. By all accounts, a pretty good dude, a pretty good representative of the NFL. There's a lot of reasons to cheer for him. And I also want to see what a Lamar Jackson offense looks like with a top-end running back. He hasn't really had it. Mark Ingram was pretty good, but he was still at the end of his career. If Derrick Henry's still in his prime, I think that it could be really fun match. But to Jori's point, I mean, you talked about leading the NFL in carries 4 out of the last 5 years. It would have been 5 of 5, but he got hurt that one year. He was leading the NFL in carries by a mile, and then he suffered the foot injury. So it's just hard. It's hard to reconcile. You know, he's an older back who's had a ton of carries, not just a lot, like unbelievable amount of carries. Can he still do it? But yet he goes to an offense with a much better scheme, a better offensive line. That offensive line does have some questions, and also a running quarterback who's going to make it so you can't just put 8 in the box and know Derrick Henry's getting the ball. Like, you're going to have to account for Lamar Jackson too. That will open up running lanes that Derrick Henry honestly has never had in his career. I'm interested to see it. I worry that it's not going to work, but I'm rooting for it to work because I think it would be really fun to see.
I just know, Frank, that his thigh is bigger than you are. Like, his thigh is bigger than your entire body, right? Like, so, you know, he's Voltron. Like, he's a Voltron. He's just a bunch of people combined into one. It's Voltron.
The thing about the carries is, yes, of course, it's a lot of carries for any running back, but we're talking about, like, okay, Christian McCaffrey's like 212 pounds or whatever he is. Nobody wants to tackle Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry's the one doing the punishing on all of these runs, you know? Like, point. It may be different for him.
He's got the thickness to be more durable.
Right. He's just a different dude, and that's why I love watching him. He's just fantastic.
Thick with 2 C's, thick in all the positivity. And Jori, Voltron was this cartoon in the 80s where all these little robots had their own powers. But then when they really needed to take somebody on, the Voltron robots would join together. And like one car would become one leg, one car was the next leg, and like a semi would be the body. So like they would make one massive robot together. Is that just Jori doesn't know anything about pop culture. So I'm just here to help with 80s cartoons. But I will say the cartoon itself for Voltron sucked. Transformers was better. Nobody was ever happy they got Voltron in their Christmas stocking. Frank, give us somebody else that was that needs to have a bounce back year in 24.
Yeah, I'm going to dig a little bit deep right here and go with Quentin Johnston, the first-round pick of the Los Angeles Chargers last year. And there was a run of receivers in the first round last year. It went Jackson Smith and Jigba, and then it went Quentin Johnston, then it went Zay Flowers, then it went Jordan Addison. Well, the other 3 all flash as rookies, right? Like,
that's not a good list.
Especially Jordan Addison.
Johnston.
Jordan Addison played really well. Zay Flowers, I think we all assume is going to take another step this season after how he ended last year. And even JSN played really well late in the season. He just was in a really crowded receiver room with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And Quentin Johnston did absolutely nothing. Like, he was really bad. Like, he couldn't get open. And that's really not a good sign, and not something you usually bounce back from. Either you can get open or you can't, and he couldn't separate. And I wonder if he's going to be able to take that next step, because the Chargers need it. Like, the Chargers traded Keenan Allen, cut Mike Williams. Yeah, they drafted Ladd McConkey, but a second-round rookie receiver is no sure thing, as much as I like McConkey's talent. They really need Quentin Johnston to be a dude, and he hasn't shown that yet. And look, there's this microwave development in the NFL now. You better be good by year 2, or you're just going to get forgotten about. So Quentin Johnston needs to play well this year, or he's just going to be buried on some depth chart and probably off to a second team trying to get that fresh start we all talk about. He needs to play well this year. The Chargers need him to play well this year. And they would be so much better off if he looks like any of those other 3 guys drafted around him this year, because it would give Justin Herbert a true alpha to work with, to grow with. I don't know if it's going to work out for him, but he needs it. Quentin Johnston needs to have a big season.
Do we believe that the Chargers offense can work like ever or in the next 10 years? I don't want to be like pessimistic about this, but I feel like they've just regularly had all of the pieces and it not work. And so there's like some history to be leaning on here.
I think Jim Harbaugh is going to figure it out, but I don't think he's going to do it year 1. I just think it's going to be not messy for the Chargers this year, but not as good as everybody thinks.
I think Harbaugh is really good at winning ugly football games. So he's going to make things as ugly as he can for the next couple of years while they gut this roster and they try and improve the talent all across the board. They're going to have to. But I mean, I love your concept of Quentin Johnston blowing up, but unless he soaks his hands in super glue, I don't understand. Like, his guy can't catch. Like, the guy just can't catch. There's, say what we want about him. It was a knock on him at TCU. It's a knock on him with the Chargers. He's going to have to figure out how to catch the ball. That's going to be the biggest hindrance for him there. Jori, what do you got for somebody that you think needs to bounce back?
Yeah, I'm going with Mr. Samuel Darnold. For some reason, once I said Samuel, Darnold felt really weird to me. But yes, I am going with Sam Darnold. I think that when I think of Sam Darnold, I think of a conversation I had with an NFC executive at owners meetings this year. And they were talking about this idea that we so often look at quarterbacks and judge them really quickly and just be like, well, this quarterback should have showed up ready to go. I gave him a first-round pick. I put prime draft capital into him, and thus he should be ready. When realistically, the coaching staff matters a lot. The roster around him matters a lot. The development program, like, I know it's like not sexy or flashy to talk about the development, but like, how are you actually acclimating a guy from a college game with different rules, different spacing, different level of competition to the pro game? And I think that Sam Darnold did not have the best chance to succeed in that situation. Like, it's hard not to have been seeing ghosts when he was at the Jets. And so now you have a player who has had a few years to kind of, he's seen different systems. He's gotten a year with Kyle Shanahan, which is great. And now he's going to one of the best offensive minds in the league in Kevin O'Connell, who we saw do so much with a lot less than Sam Darnold last year. He's going to be throwing to Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. He's got TJ Hawkinson. Like, he's got that Brian Flores defense. I think this is a guy who really could give the Vikings good reason to not play JJ McCarthy at all this year and maybe not even play him in 2025. Like, I don't think that would be a loss for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the Vikings. I think that if they can get a couple great years out of Sam Darnold, especially after being so close to where they needed to be with Kirk Cousins, I think that would be a win. And so I think Sam is going to finally have this true chance to be like, can you do it at the NFL level? If he can't do it this year, it's going to be difficult to come back, but I think that he will have by far his best chance.
I just don't think it's there. We haven't seen enough from Sam Darnold for me to really buy into this at all. And they did draft JJ McCarthy very high in the draft, I think 10 overall. And guys like that don't sit often. Look, to your points, you make great points. You're Kyle Shanahan, and then you go to Kevin O'Connell, two great offensive coaches that the talent was there at USC. This, for a brief instance, he was thought of as a generational prospect, a real one, not just a guy we call a generational prospect every year, but a real, true, like A-plus prospect. And it just hasn't happened. And I'm not saying there's been no flashes, but they've been rare, and you'd like to see something by now. I think JJ McCarthy beats him really, really early in the season. I think probably start Sam Darnold.
How early do you think we'll see McCarthy?
My birthday is September 22nd, so let's go with that, week 3. I think I just think Sam Darnold doesn't have it as an NFL quarterback. He might be a good bridge guy, good backup for a while, but not a preferred starter when you got the 10th overall pick sitting there. I think that McCarthy gets that job earlier rather than later. I think he competes for Rookie of the Year, actually, because the situation's so good. But that's another argument in Sam Darnold's favor. The situation's good. Like, if it's going to happen for Sam Darnold, to your points, it better happen this year because you're throwing to the best receiver on the planet. Rookie, we just talked about Jordan Addison, who had a great year. Hawkinson will be back at some point this year. Aaron Jones helps the running game. Their offensive line's not really even that bad. Coach is good. Like, everything is set up for Sam Darnold to succeed. I just don't think it's there for him.
I just love the fact that everybody were each proposing for bounce backs. We're like, nope, not that guy. All right, so we get one more. We get one more each, and I'll go just based on what you guys have already been talking about, right? Like we were talking about, Frank mentioned year 2. We live in a microwave league. If you don't do it in year 2, then did you give up? Jori mentions that people are saying, hey, with quarterbacks, sometimes we pull the plug too quickly. I mean, it's a make or break year for Bryce Young, no?
Yeah,
I mean, Dave Canales comes over as the head coach, and now he's been, all of a sudden, he's quarterback whisperer because he figured out how to do it with one guy we were all ready to give up on, right? He goes behind an offensive line that spent $100 million this year trying to get new talent and more than that as they tried to increase their talent around. Like, the Panthers have done everything they can to try and better support Bryce Young. And the hardest part is that I don't know that you can just judge Bryce Young. Bryce Young is going to be judged against the draft capital that they gave up, which includes pieces this year and against CJ Stroud. So all of a sudden, Bryce Young is going to be right or wrong facing comparisons to the success of CJ Stroud and every quarterback in this year's draft class, because they could have had absolutely any of them immediately on top of this expectation that Canales fixed Baker. So Canales must be able to fix Bryce, all while you're doing it in Carolina, a place that is historically unstable. But it feels like he's got to bounce back to at least be some level of, I see a glimmer of hope. I'm not saying he's got to turn around and be a Pro Bowl player out of the gates. I'm just saying that Bryce Young has to bounce back to show people, hey, I can play in this league. Everything's going to be fine. Calm down. Let's continue this trend. Because if that doesn't happen, you just got to wonder. I mean, if the Panthers are sitting here with the first overall pick in next year's draft and their quarterback stinks again, they're not going to keep running it back over and over again. So wildly, I think it's a bounce back year for Bryce.
I think that for any of the other 31 teams, I wouldn't agree with you. But for the Carolina Panthers and David Tepper, there has to be urgency for Bryce Young, because if they get to the end of the year, Bryce Young hasn't played well, that based on his history, the owner of that team is going to say, I spent how much on these offensive guards? We went ahead and traded for Quentin Johnston. We drafted a receiver in the first round, and he still didn't do it. Yeah, we're hitting a reset button. Get rid of Bryce Young. I want somebody else. Like that. That's just the way it is. Any other team, I would think that you give the first overall pick a third year. I don't think I guess they don't in Carolina, unless the owner has changed his ways. So, yeah, Bryce Young better show something this year. And I think he will. I think that, look, for all the, that guy's not going to, he's not going to bounce back. I think Bryce Young will. The situation is so much better for him. We liked him so much coming out of Alabama, except for his size, which we talked about a lot. I do think he shows some glimmers of hope this year. He's probably never going to be CJ Stroud, who's awesome, but I think he could be a good, solid starting quarterback in the NFL still.
Yeah, Frank got in the jabs about David Tepper and patience that I intended to get in, so I'll just co-sign a lot of those. If there's anyone who's not going to be keeping their top quarterback after a couple of years, it is David Tepper. But I think that it was interesting when I was in Washington a couple weeks ago and I was looking at the coaching staff. I'm like, wow, how stacked is that coaching staff? You have Dan Quinn, you have Cliff Kingsbury, you have Brian Johnson helping out, you have Anthony Lynn on staff. And then a tiny part of me got a little bit worried of, wait, didn't Carolina do this last year and it was a disaster with too many cooks in the kitchen? And I'm not predicting that for the Commanders, but I think when we consider what would allow Bryce to bounce back, this is not the same coaches, the same level of offensive line stability, the same people around him, and us being like, hey, Bryce, just be confident, have this crazy year two jump. He has a new voice, and he's able to sort of put everything from last year behind him, or at least a lot of last year behind him, and I think that matters psychologically. I think even if he was more capable last year than we thought he was, and also CJ Stroud skewed our perception of what he should have been, I think having new voices, and particularly that upgraded offensive line, gives him the chance to at least show what he can do.
Yes, I will by the way, real quick, Jori, please don't rip my Commanders. That's my team.
Yes, you're right.
I've taken ownership of the Commanders.
Right. I will apologize. And again, I hope I'm wrong, because there's a lot of great guys on that staff who I just enjoy talking to, but there was a little part of me that was like, I hope this works better than the last time we tried this with a rookie quarterback.
But what you said sticks in my head, because I talked to Baker at the Super Bowl. And one of the things I asked Baker, plain and simple, what changed in Tampa that made everything so successful for you? And he thought about it for a second. Bones. He said, you know what? For him, it was finally going somewhere where he didn't have to be the savior. He just had to go in and be Baker. And he felt comfortable there, just knowing that he could just be a guy. He didn't have to be the guy. He didn't have to live up to any expectations for anything. He could just be a guy. Dave Canales was part of that. But that is not Bryce Young's reality. Bryce Young is not going into a situation with Dave Canales where he can just be a guy. He is still the number one overall pick for that team, for that franchise. He is supposed to be a franchise savior. So the very thing that first and foremost was credited by Baker is an advantage that Bryce certainly won't have, which only makes me more concerned about Baker and his trajectory.
On one hand, I understand that Baker was saying that you recently had a Super Bowl. There's a lot of talent around me. I don't have to fully do it. On the other hand, he was following Tom Brady. So I think he's being a little too humble about the shoes he was stepping into, the expectations and the level of quarterback play that this team had recently seen.
That's a fair point. It's fair. Maybe, you know what? Baker's a weird dude. Maybe he's just Tom, I don't know.
Baker's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun.
All right, Frank, give us somebody you've got on your mind that needs to bounce back season.
Yeah, and to me, it's Geno Smith. It's the will the real Geno Smith please stand up year, because 2 years ago, I was very skeptical about him when he started hot. They wrote me off. I didn't write back. It was such a good story, but I'm like, come on, it's Geno Smith. He's not that good. And then he played great throughout the whole season. Led the NFL in completion percentage, really was good, earned that contract extension he got. And I came around. I said, wow, everything I see from Geno is legit. Like, he can repeat this. Comes back last year, and I don't know if it was the pressure of the contract or just the expectations. Look, 2022, Geno Smith was on house money. Nobody ever expected Geno Smith to be a viable starting quarterback in the NFL. He was. You come back in 2023 with real expectations, a much bigger contract, and it just wasn't the same for him. He made a lot of bad decisions, a lot of big mistakes, turnovers. He still made big plays, too. People forget that. Geno Smith ranked very, very high in big-time throws, the Pro Football Focus metric. He did make plays, but it just wasn't the same because of the mistakes he made, the decision-making. He just was pressing all season, I think. He comes back, new coaching staff, a really interesting offensive hire. Grubb, their offensive coordinator, comes from University of Washington, who had never spent a day in the NFL. I'm really fascinated by that hire. If that offense could take off the ground, maybe Geno Smith can kind of revive his career yet again. But if he doesn't, I think the Seattle Seahawks move on, right? Like, this is one of those really clear, like, hey, we brought you back for one more year, Geno, and there was a lot of question if they would. Either you do it this year or you don't, and that's going to determine who our starting quarterback is in 2025.
I feel like Geno's going to be eligible for comeback player of the year like every 2 to 3 years, or in our
just every other year.
Every 2 to 3 years. Yeah. It's like, have a down year, but I'm back. Have another down year. I love that coaching staff. I think they're fascinating. I think that the Washington offensive coordinator connection will allow them to use concepts that the league is not used to, especially at the beginning of the season, when a lot of coaches say that like first quarter of the season you have 30% unscouted looks, which can be a huge advantage. You have people around the league who view Mike McDonald, and this is a little early, but someone did tell me it, as the Shanahan of the defense in terms of the way he views his ability to, or the way he is able to call the game, the way he sees the game. And so I think there should be potential for Geno, but it'll be interesting. I agree with you that I don't think he's got like a multi-year leash necessarily, but I do think that he will be able to capitalize off new systems or new concepts coming into the NFL. And if you can catch momentum, I think that will be enough.
And they have a ton of talent on that roster. Like Metcalf, Lockett, JSN, even Noah Fant, they gave a big contract to, Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet. Like, he's got to do it. Like, there's no excuse for him not to.
Geno's career at this point is like a bad 80s horror movie. It dies at the end of every one of them, it dies. And then 2 years later, they're like, doesn't matter. Friday the 13th, part 9. Like, that's just what's going to keep happening. He's like Jason Voorhees to the NFL. Jori, give us one more player that you've got your eye on for a bounce back.
Yeah, I was like, don't be the girl who just does quarterbacks for this entire exercise. So I went with Kyle Pitts of the Falcons, and I think he's really interesting because think about the way that we were talking about him when he came into this league, the way he was supposed to be this generational, maybe best tight end ever type prospect. Was he the next Gronk? All of that, not in terms of how he plays, but in terms of the level at which he plays. And then it just didn't really happen. Like, he's not been bad, but again, after his first year was like good, but not great. And then he struggled. He had the injury. Then last year, I always think that the first year after the injury, no one expects you to be quite the same, but 2 years later, you are expected to be back. Now you bring him back. He's going to have Kirk Cousins, by far the best quarterback he's played in. They still have all the talent pieces around it. So to me, a bounce back year for him doesn't necessarily mean that he has the gaudiest numbers. It means that he is able to, in running, pass catching, blocking, all of that, be that complete tight end, be that like incredible target that they were expecting, and that when he does get the opportunities, he really elevates. And I just feel like, I mean, I know this week is the tight end university where a bunch of tight ends around the league gathered the camp, and Dak Prescott, Cowboys quarterback, was there. And one of the things he was talking to tight ends about is he said, you always got to think about receiving, running, and blocking as the three things. Well, the fourth best thing that you can do to make yourself a complete tight end is to know what your quarterback's thinking and know what we want from you. A tight end can be a quarterback's best friend, which we've seen so much. And so for Kirk Cousins, who's already playing at a high level, but is going to be getting used to the chemistry and the different nuances of his new pass catchers, Kyle Pitts has such an opportunity from the beginning to be like, hey, I'm your guy, trust me, and throw the ball to me.
And Cousins really, really liked throwing the ball to TJ Hawkinson after Hawkinson arrived in Minnesota. So he knows how to utilize a guy like that, as you talked about with Dak talking to the tight ends. I just wrote the Falcons preview. It won't publish for a while, but in one of the sections, I started to make fun of Arthur Smith because it's easy. Arthur Smith ran an end around for Jonu Smith at the goal line last year. Like, we forget how bad he was getting his best players involved. But I also had to take a step back, take a little bit of a contrarian view and say, what if Arthur Smith was right about all these guys and they're just not very good? Like, what if we step back in 3 years and say, well, that's why Arthur Smith wasn't using these guys. Nobody can get anything out of them. I don't think that way about Pitts because we have to take a step back and remember, he was probably the best tight end prospect of all time, or at least in the conversation. And he's one of two guys to have a 1,000-yard season as a rookie tight end. Mike Ditka being the other who's in the Hall of Fame. So it's not like Pitts has been an absolute zero. He just fell off the planet for a while. Some injuries have popped up. I do think he bounces back really, really well with Kirk, but I think we also have to keep our mind open to maybe this wasn't just all Arthur Smith being dumb and wanting to show fantasy football players that he's smarter than them. Maybe it was just that these guys aren't as good as we think. It's possible anyway. I don't think so with Pitts or Bijan or Drake London, but it'll be very interesting to see what Pitts does this year because he doesn't have the Arthur Smith excuse anymore.
Did you guys think that he was going to get his fifth-year option picked up? And if you thought he was, did you think it was like, he'll for sure get it? Or, let's see where the Falcons view him?
I don't think you had to. I don't think you had to see it through. Like, he is... That rookie year, again, he didn't throw a lot of touchdowns, but too much potential. And if he had 300 yards his rookie year, maybe by this point you'd be like, ooh, this guy's a bust. But that rookie year, look, it's hard to get, obviously, 1,000 yards as a rookie tight end, and he did it.
Right.
That leads me to believe that there's something there.
This is my humble brag moment to remind everybody I'm a Biletnikoff Award voter in college football for the best wide receiver in the country. And the funny thing that I remember about Pitts that year covering it was the raging debate over whether or not he was so good that he should get votes as a wide receiver in the Biletnikoff Award. And to me, I continually look at it and say, you got smart guys, and particularly former players that looked at it and said, I've never seen anything as uncoverable as Kyle Pitts. Like, that was a real conversation. I don't think that many people can be that drastically wrong. I think the NFL just hasn't taken advantage of it. So to me, I think the Kyle Pitts discussion is an absolutely great one, Joy. That's a great pick by you. We saved the best one for last. I'm not just buttering you up because I want a good score. Before we get out of here, I want to ask you guys a deep dive question that we didn't plan for. I'm really just throwing this out to you off the top of my head. So, this could go totally off the rails. And if it does, then producer Andrew can just edit the whole thing. But I'm sitting here thinking we are on the heels as we wrap up this episode of having just watched the Boston Celtics win the NBA championship. Why am I talking about that on Zero Blitz? I was thinking about this today. The Celtics, for years, for several years, have heard, blow it up, get rid of your dynamic duo, 107 playoff games together, no championship, this is a waste, without any context to why they weren't able to win the big one. It was just, they just choke. Is there not a lesson sometimes when you look at this and say, hey, stay in the course and not just change for the sake of change? The Celtics just won a championship on it. And it makes me think of the Bills and the Cowboys and any other team that we're sitting here saying, well, they just can't get it done. You got to blow it up. Do you? Like, sometimes you have to look at championships, I think, with the roundness of perspective to why a team didn't win and understanding that every year's playoff journey is a new one. And blowing it up just to blow it up doesn't make you closer to a championship team. It just makes fans feel better about the sake of change. I think that right now you could look at teams like the Cowboys and the Bills specifically and say the Celtics teach them a lot about patience.
I agree. And it made me think of the 2006 Chargers. I mean, going way back, I believe it was 2006. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they go 14-2, have a really fluky loss, fumbled interception to the Patriots. Patriots go on the AFC Championship game, and they fire Marty Schottenheimer. It's like, you just went 14-2. We overreact to single instances in the playoffs, and it's especially harder in the NFL than it is the NBA. Like, NBA has 7 games. If you have a bad game, you can bounce back and win it in 6 or 7 games as a series. NFL, you got one shot. And if you lose, like the Bills have, I think the Bills, when you were talking about it before you mentioned the Bills, that was a team that popped in my mind of, just because they haven't won yet doesn't mean there's some fatal flaw there. Like, they just haven't won yet. Like, Tyler Bass missed a field goal at the end. Like, that's going to happen. These coin flip things happen all the time in the NFL. And I think there is something to be said about staying the course. I think there also is a point like the Minnesota Vikings got to at the end of last year where you kind of look at each other and you say, we're not going where we need to go with Kirk Cousins. Why pay him $180 million again? Now, they tried. They really did. But I think there's something to be said about knowing where you are, self-scouting well enough to say, Do we stay the course like the Celtics did, or is it time to kind of make a change?
Well, I think one of the big differences I see between the Celtics and the Cowboys is how far they got in the playoffs when they did have those good teams. Like to have multiple times making it to the finals, another several years making it to the conference finals recently. Like your final 2, final 4 before you make that final 1. Like you are winning in the playoffs. I think what I struggle with Dallas in terms of how do we envision their road to an eventual Super Bowl is they just can't even make the NFC Championship. They haven't done it in close to 30 years now. And I think at some point that does become this, as much as the players want to be like, we don't control what happened before we get here. Like this is part of your culture. This is part of what you are going to hear about all the time and what you are motivated to try and break. And so to me, I think that's where I would ask myself, because again, we're going to see a really interesting conversation with the Cowboys if they don't advance this year of, hey, they've got 3 guys they're going to have to decide if they're going to pay. And if you don't get where you want to go, is it the players? Is it the culture? Is it the coaching staff? Is it all of it? But to me, the ability to win something in the playoffs, even if you're not the rare statistical team that is able to go all the way, that's where we see the difference.
I hear you on that. And you're totally right. It all makes sense. My pushback is if I told you today that whoever's picking in the draft next year could draft somebody that would be as good as Dak, people would freak out. But the Cowboys in a year are going to make a decision on whether or not they're willing to give Dak that kind of money. And the answer could be no. For what? Like if you're telling me your plan is I'm going to draft Shedeur Sanders, if I told you Shedeur could turn out to be Dak, people would be doing cartwheels in the street for that. But like in the moment, they don't want Dak anymore. It's like that's where I feel like it's just change for the Cowboys.
And you'll also have to see if Dak still wants the Cowboys because they can't tag him and they can't trade him. So he's going to have that. And I think the question isn't, is Dak good enough? Or is the Cowboys, it might be, is that the right marriage in a year?
And I also, just to interject here, we always hear, all of us hear, oh, we got to get rid of the quarterback. We got to trade the quarterback. We got to get rid of Dak or whoever it is. It used to be Matthew Stafford with the Lions. Oh, we got to. I always ask, okay, cool. Cut your quarterback. Trade your quarterback. That's great. You tell me who your quarterback is week 1 of this season. You got to answer that. That's what these NFL teams have to answer. When we sit here and play armchair quarterback about like, oh, just like that.
Head coach too.
Head coach too. It's easier to find head coaches. I will say that. But quarterback wise, like if you want to get rid of your quarterback, that's great. You know, your quarterback's going to be week 1 is probably going to be like Sam Darnold. Like that's who you're going to be settling for. You're going to have something like that happen.
Frank is very concerned about Sam Darnold.
Very concerned about Sam.
Look, you think Frank's concerned? Look, I would take Sam Darnold over what I like right now. I'm trying to figure out if Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew is going to win the job. And I got guys that follow the team that are out there tweeting practice looked really bad for both the quarterbacks and the OTAs. I'm like, son of a biscuit.
You know what they'd be tweeting if Sam Darnold was there? OTAs look really bad because Sam Darnold stinks. Like he would just be the next problem. But here's the thing too about talk about championships, stay the course and all that. Something that everybody hates because we want the NFL to be the ultimate answer. What we saw on the field is real. The NFL's a lot of luck. A lot of luck. Let me say that again. Whether you win a championship in the NFL or even the NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball is a lot of luck. The coin flips came your way. David Tyree pinned a ball against his helmet. Malcolm Butler read a play and caught a ball. Like, nobody talks about Malcolm Butler's catch, by the way. He made a great catch. The stuff like that happens. Or the punt the San Francisco 49ers had last year doesn't bounce off their guy and the Chiefs don't recover it. And the 49ers go on to win a Super Bowl. A lot of these things is just luck. It's just the NFL is so competitive that it's just a bunch of series of flipping coins. And you just hope that the coin flips on your side more times than not.
Well, and it's not even equivalent to any of the other sports because you don't have this 4 out of 7 situation. You have one time. Right. And so there is more variability that you have to allow for in the NFL. And I've talked to general managers about this where they're like, hey, I can't just assume the best team is going to win. Best team might win 4 out of 7. It's less likely the best team wins 1 out of 1 than it is that the best team wins 4 out of 7.
Jori, the best team I've ever seen is the 2007 New England Patriots, and it's not even close. If you were to ask me 20 years from now, who's the best football team you've ever seen? 2007 Patriots. You know what? They picked a bad day to have a bad day. It just happens.
You're also dealing with people, where as much as we have all of this outburst of analytics, and I think that there's a lot of good analytics stuff for the game, even though sometimes I'm listening to people talk and I'm like, I have no clue what you're saying. But even so, I think that you just still have the human emotion element of it that we just can't control for.
Which is why I don't believe rosters and payments are made necessarily for championships. I believe guys get paid for proximity. if you are putting my team in the range of proximity where we can contend. That's why every former NFL player I've ever worked with says the same stupid phrase. Get in the dance, you got a chance. They all say it for a reason, because it's about proximity. And look, Dak may not be winning Super Bowls. We all understand that. But there are a ton of teams that would kill for Dak right now because he will give them proximity. And the Celtics didn't blow up their dynamic duo because they gave them proximity. And that to me is just, it's a lesson. It's a lesson we're learning from the NBA Finals. Here's what I know, Jori. Did we get a 10?
No, we don't want 10s. The goal is not perfect.
That was just a no. That was an immediate no, too. It wasn't even, she didn't it
wasn't like do we get an 8 or 9? Like, you don't want a 10. You want there to be room for improvement. You want to keep the chip on your shoulder. Like, come on, guys.
Breaking news real quick.
Wow,
Ramondre
everyone
Stevenson
looks really disappointed.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm just Ramondre Stevenson just agreed to a 4-year, $36 million deal to stay in New England per Adam Schefter. So
good play.
The Patriots, who are going to suck this year, have their running back under contract. Look, I'm trolling. I'm just
an epithet.
Look, I'm angry because I didn't get a 10. Ramondre's contract gets a 10. What, did we get a 9.8 maybe? 9.5, Jori? 9.3?
8-3, 7-3, 6.
Okay, you know what?
Dropping every.
Follow Frank at Yahoo Schwab. Follow me at Jason
Jori.
Fitz. Do not follow Jori. There's no reason to.
Do not follow Jori at Jori Epstein. Don't do it. Don't go read her story on Jayden Daniels.
Oh, no, go read that. Like, that's good for everybody. Go read the story
good.
on Jayden Daniels. It's amazing. Thanks to Andrew behind the scenes for keeping this all together. Most importantly, this podcast, what we've just learned, got in the proximity of a 10. We'll just go with that.
See,
there we go.
We're paying you guys for
Full
proximity.
Circle.
There
Full
you
circle.
go. Validating it.
That's it for Zero Blitz. Come back next week for more. Please, God.